welcome to another amazing episode of Say It Online, where we help digital agency owners stop just randomly shouting into the void and start communicating meaningfully and effectively in this digital age. I'm your host, Say Gabriel, and this episode was brought to you by our sponsor, Anansi Content. If you're sick of conversion content being a huge pain in your agency's butt, especially websites, campaigns, etc., let's talk. With the smoothest content process ever, a team of unbelievably skilled and organized content strategists, and years of subcontracting experience, Anansi is looking to make your life as a digital agency owner unbelievably easier. Just head, if you're interested, to anansicontent.com, that's ANANSI content.com, and hit Let's Talk. And now, without further ado, here's our episode. Welcome, everybody, to part 2 of our special 2-part series of Digital Agency Real Talk on quarterly planning. Joining me on this sexy topic today is Celene Hogue, my Chief of Ops. Welcome, Celene.
Hello.
So hopefully some of you guys tuned in last week for the first part of our quarterly planning conversation. It was our first totally unscripted, let's just dig into what we do and see where it goes episode. And as we were doing it, we really found that it was too much to cover in 1 hour. So last week, we covered topics such as the kind of basic brand and vision part of quarterly planning. We do use a tool called the VTO, the Vision Traction Organizer, from a company called EOS. Talked about that last week. Feel free to go in the episode or in the show notes for that information. And we covered everything from core values to marketing strategy to creating a 3-year picture. And in case you are familiar with EOS and didn't catch the episode, we did talk about, after 4 years of doing this, how we've kind of modified their process a bit, where we found it to be more useful or not. And today we are going to tackle the much sooner or the much closer up stuff. So setting goals for the next year, setting goals and measurables for the next 3 months, tackling an issues list, and then actually planning and executing your quarterly planning. So that part, not so much EOS, that's going to be just pure Anansi, me, and Celene's experiences. So I'm super keen, even though we have no script again. Why don't you kick us off, Celene?
Yeah, so I'm just going to dive in straight to the traction section. I know it's not a lot of a segue, but hopefully some people listen to our episodes back to back, and then we won't need a segue. It'll be perfect. So the traction section pretty much has 3 sections. It has strategy, it has goals, and it has issues list. So,
and I just want to note, I'm not sure if those are the original names on the VTO. I think it might be the 1-year picture and quarterly or something like that.
That is true.
Yeah.
We're going to be sharing our template that we use now in the show notes for today. And I mean, I think the original VTO is available for free online. So you can kind of take the two and compare them, and then I'm probably going to do that too. Now I'm curious.
And if you are, if you're someone from EOS or whatever, we love you. We are plugging you. We have linked back to all of your stuff. When we are saying, over the years, we have tweaked things a little bit. So the stuff we're giving is going to be like unbranded towards EOS, but definitely, feel free to start with the EOS version if you have been following their practices. We just want to give you some, again, real talk.
Yeah, for sure. So the first section, which on our template is called strategy, it might be like the 1-year plan. Basically, it starts pretty simply. We say what is 1 year from now, and what does that look like at a super high level? Like what is it? I think this is one where I think the original template differs from ours. I think originally it says annual revenue. We have like rolling 12 revenue. So the revenue from the last 12 months, not kind of like a calendar year.
And I'll just explain that a little bit, why we made that choice, because it's relevant to the next one as well, which is profit, which we measure both as a percentage and as a rough number. And the reason that we changed it to rolling 12 and we look at the profit, although I think that was part of the original, is because of a book that we read called Simple Numbers, Straight Profit. having a brain fart on the author's name, as well as Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, which interreferences it. And one of the concepts they bring up is this idea of rolling 12 revenue, where there's always going to be ups and downs and bumps in a calendar year and month to month. And if you're always looking at the last 12 months and at averages of the last 12 months, you have the opportunity to ease some of those bumps. Those of you who work with Google Analytics data, this is similar advice to what I've always been given and followed when it comes to Google Analytics or other sources of data that have a natural level of variability, is that, especially for this, where it really is the 1 year, we want to look at because this is going to change every quarter, right? So we want to make sure we're always looking at the last 12 months, not some kind of more arbitrary January to December mark. Similarly with Profit, again, encourage you to take a look at those books for more details on this. But your percentage of profit determines an element of the health and lifeline of your business. So understanding what those percentages are, which are usually in the kind of 5 to 15 after you've accounted for a market salary and those kinds of things, 5 to 15% range, that's good to know, because depending on where you're at in your business and where you are in terms of debt and what you're creating, that again, this is a practical number for us. It shows us kind of where we are relative to our goals and desired business health.
Yeah, so true. And as you mentioned, we follow Profit First, which means that we actually set the profit percentage number, our target number of what we set aside each kind of like pay period, each financial period, which is twice a month. So that's a number we've control over, but of course within the constraints of what our expenses are and stuff. So that's why we have a target of what kind of profit we want to hit. And it's not like some surprise number like, oh, how much profit's left over? It's what are we setting to hit at the profit at that revenue level a year from now?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know several, if not many of our listeners are fans of Profit First with Mike Michalowicz. He's also, just by the way, he reads his own audiobooks and he does a lot of podcast interviews, and he's freaking hilarious and really relatable and very real. So Simple Number Straight Profit is a little bit more of a technical book, but definitely recommend Mike and his approach. I actually give budgeting workshops on a personal level in my community based on Profit First, and my whole family follows it on a personal level, and it paid for my wedding without any debt last year. So
yay, debt free wedding. So that's kind of the top like 3 super high level things. So there's a future date, the rolling 12 revenue. We have it annually. We've also we mentioned this in last episode. We also break it down per month. So what does that look like on a monthly basis? And in our case, we're looking to grow. I know a lot of most businesses are probably looking to grow their revenue. Sometimes they're not. They're just like, I'm exactly happy where I am. But we break it down per month. Like, what's the starting revenue, say like immediately next month? And what do we want our monthly revenue to be, in a year, in like 12 months from now? So, and then, and then what does that look like averaged out to kind of the rolling 12, taking the growth into account?
Yeah, this was definitely, I think I mentioned last episode for the 3-year plan, a secret weapon for me in terms of making this relevant for my business. Obviously, if you are a leader in your business, it is more than likely that you have some connection to the financial aspect of it. That being said, unless you are a financial whiz and that is your specialty, for me, breaking it down in, okay, this is what we're making each month. This is what we're bringing in each month right now. And this is what we want to be bringing in each month in a year, really helps me see the relationship between like, okay, is that number for today, is it doubling? Is it increasing by 30%? And then you can build a roadmap to get there, because there are certain kind of quantifiable variables, like in terms of like, anyway, that's a whole other podcast. I won't get into that right now. But anyway, that data is valuable because that if you say want to double your business in the next year, that is going to require shifting some of your inputs in a certain way and will require a different strategy than if you just want to grow by say like 10% in the next year. So very helpful. I found that super helpful.
Yeah. And we actually I do ahead of quarterly planning, I do a lot of financial projections, but we start with what are we making like per month now? What do we want to be making per month in a year? And we use that to determine what the rolling 12 revenue is, not the other way around. We don't just like choose an arbitrary number out of the air. Like, this sounds good for an annual revenue. And what does that look like? We actually start with like the realistic numbers we can control and then figure out what that revenue is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really cool as well, because then it becomes a little bit of a visioning exercise where it's really like, wow, where do we want to be in a year? Where do we want the team to be in a year? You know, I mean, I would say we're further along in terms of everybody making a market wage than most businesses. But I perceive that really removes some of the, if you are someone like many people that we work with who are still on the path to making sure that you as an owner operator or et cetera, or as the founder or as the C-level or however you define yourself are making that market wage, not just whatever's left over, on top of whatever profit you may be collecting. It's really valuable to start with thinking of that instead of finishing by thinking of that, because of the impact on your mindset, right? You're like, wow, this is possible. We have a roadmap to get there, as opposed to, oh my gosh, like, you know, when I started that transition to making a market wage, like it was terrifying, right? I didn't know where to start with that. And this was a really good process to go through to help me both create a roadmap to get there for my sake as well as for the company's sake, right? Like, it is for the health of your business that you want to pay yourself a market wage. But also for the mindset shift of being like, wow, this is totally okay and totally possible. You know, no matter what level of success you're at with your business, I think we almost all come from that background of working way too many hours for way little pay. And it can be hard to kick that.
It can. And that kind of brings us to the next section, which is measurables. So this is a list of like, what does this look like in terms of specific numbers to hit? So we budget a certain amount that we want for emergency savings. As you know, like all businesses go through ups and downs, and it's amazing to have savings. We also break down by quarter, like how many projects do we want per quarter? So, you know, we have this monthly revenue amount, which is not arbitrary. So, you know, I pull up my spreadsheets and I pull up all my numbers and I do my integrator thing. And I say like, so how many projects, if we want to make $50,000 in a month in revenue, like how many projects is that going to be with our current team? Do we have the capacity for it? What are operating costs going to look like? Because if it's increasing, operating costs will probably increase a certain amount. Are taxes increasing? You know, it's all broken down. But then what we do from all those numbers is we take like, what are the relevant numbers that we can control? We can't really control taxes. That's just going to happen anyway. So the measurables that we pull out of that is the projects per quarter. So we know if we want to make this much revenue, it's going to take this many projects, both based on our current average project size and maybe what we think our average project size is going to be a year from now. And then that way it gives something to focus on. You know, if one of your goals is sales, you know, you need to sell X number of projects a month or a week or whatever it is at X level to reach those revenue goals. So they're not arbitrary. You know exactly how to get there.
Yeah. And I think one of the beautiful things about this is that after a while, the numbers themselves tell a story, in the sense that if you look at the relationship between our 3-year and our 1 year and our 3 month, they're all connected and they all speak to each other. So you could see, for example, looking at us, that our 1 year and our 3-year, monthly revenue or rolling 12 are not too different. Well, the rolling 12 is different, but the monthly revenue is actually not too different. And the reason for that is because we don't want to become this like massive, endlessly growing company. We want to hit a certain point and then remain relatively stable there. So again, our numbers and goals reflect that. But touching into the measurables piece, I can't emphasize enough how simple this should be. And what I mean by that is not that, oh, it should be easy, and if it's not easy for you, you're bad or wrong or you suck. No, not at all. But that once you will know that you have found the right measurables because they are simple. A former mentor of mine would always talk about napkin math. You know, this should be something that really is napkin math. Like you should be able to scribble it down on a napkin and like maybe just with a quick calculation from your phone, understand how that's going to impact it. So we've tried a few different ones here. But for us, it really came down to, okay, like at first we're like, okay, we want to sell this many projects at this size and this many projects at this tier, and this is how it all fits together and this much consulting work. And ultimately, we simplified it way the heck down to basically, as Celene said, what's our average project size? And roughly how many of those projects do we need to sell to hit a revenue goal at the end, right? At the 1 year mark. And then how can we ramp up to there from here? Taking into consideration, things that are going on. So like, for example, Q4, potentially, we knew that let's say like Q3, we're going to be at a conference or something near the end of Q3. So we know a lot of Q3 is going to be ramping up for this conference. So maybe our number of projects in Q3 is going to be less, but Q4, we're going to have a much higher goal because we're going to be, reaping the rewards of that energy that we spent in Q3. So again, just keeping it really, really simple. This could even be just a single thing that you measure. And if it is going to be projects, then I highly, highly recommend, again, taking an average project size and then using a measurable that is based on that, as opposed to complicating it to the point where you can't look at it, do a little quick calculation, be like, yes, okay, good.
Yeah. Such good advice. The next section of the section, the next kind of line, when you see the template, it'll make more sense. Maybe open the template first and then follow along with our episode.
I think that's only for, I don't know. I like to listen to podcasts when I'm like walking and running and stuff. That's not always an option. So only do so if it's safe for you. If you're like driving your car right now or crossing the street, do not open the template. But if you happen to be in a place where it's super easy to pull up on your phone, it definitely helps a little bit.
Yeah.
Please. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. That's good advice though. Safety disclaimer.
Yes, I'm the podcast listener as well and the audio person. So Celine's much more of a hard physical copy book type.
Yeah. And if I do listen to podcasts, I'm like at a computer taking notes. So the next point on there is staff. So as we mentioned last episode, we're pretty much at our mature size. In the last, I would say, about 2 years, we've gone from 2 or 3 people to 8 people. And our goal 1 year from now is still a team of 8. I think our goal 10 years from now is a team of 8 or 9. We're not looking to grow massively. So, we list out both the number of our team and what those roles look like. This is for us. We kind of glance at it and go, okay, check, next. But a year ago, we'd look at this, even 2 years ago, and we'd say, hey, where do we want to be in a year? Are we hiring this year? What quarter do we think we might be able to hire in? And this was actually a really, really important kind of piece of that roadmap of who do we hire and when, which I feel like is its own whole separate thing, but it's good to have it on here because then you're starting to think about it and plan for it.
Yeah. And I think that I'm pretty sure that this staff element was not on the original template. Feel free to nag me if I was wrong. But again, this is one of the things that its relevance to you will depend on where you're at with your personal business and your personal goals. For us, again, for me, even when it was just me, having a team was pretty much always from almost the beginning part of my desired equation and part of the goals. So this was something that was really valuable because it showed us how to make sure that hiring didn't become arbitrary. Now, I hear a lot from listeners and clients and partners, consulting clients and agency partners that perhaps you have a huge windfall, you have a lot of energy, you're at capacity, and so you hire, and hiring can kind of turn into a little bit of a hydra thing where you're kind of either trying to get ahead of capacity or, you meet people that you think are really perfect and you maybe want to create a role for them or something like that, or you just need someone, but you're not quite sure. And one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was understanding the structure of your organization based on the roles needed and filling in the people afterwards, as opposed to trying to build roles around the people. This is especially useful if you, and I do mean you, are wearing too many hats. because it forces you to see which roles you are sitting in and what hats need to be worn, and admit it if you are the one wearing those hats. All of this can be done in much more detail in like an org chart and stuff, which is something else we sometimes do for quarterly planning as we got bigger. But again, if you're just intending on remaining a team of 3 or a team of 4 or solopreneur or whatever, again, this could be more or less relevant for you. For us, it was just a super high level look, and it helped us both support our goals and kind of identify some different goals for the year. But these days is not even all that relevant for us anymore, because we're like, okay, cool. These, yes, we know these roles. We've known for a long time we need these roles. Because capacity was a huge issue for a long time, put a lot of energy into understanding what this mature layout would look like and how we could support our work with the capacity that we want, because we want to be trusted. We don't want to be an afterthought. We don't want any of our clients or partners to ever be an afterthought, right? Or have to wait weeks to kick something off. Anyway, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but all of this made this work helpful for us because now we don't barely have to look at it at all.
Yeah, exactly. And, I've probably said this already, but when you're doing this, don't just kind of go through the quarterly planning as an exercise. I highly encourage you to look at each section of this and think about how they interact with each other. So, don't, be like, if your goal is to drastically or even slightly increase your revenue or the number of projects in the next year, then definitely give a lot of critical thinking to the staff section and decide whether you're going to have the capacity to fulfill your projects a year from now with that staff level. And, and if the answer is no, if you're planning on selling 50 projects a year by the end of a year from now, but you don't have the team to actually fulfill that, start thinking about it early so you don't get into that crunch of having all these awesome projects and lots of money coming in, but no way of fulfilling them.
Oh, yeah. I would say that even goes the opposite way too, right? Like if you're in a super, heavy duty period right now where you're fielding tons and tons of projects, ask yourself, if we have a slow month or 3, what is that going to mean? And look at, your history and whether that, for most businesses, that is a reality, right? And ask yourself how you're going to support that. Sometimes it's emergency backups. But sometimes, you need to be aware of how you're potentially going to shrink as well as grow. One of the choices that we made early on that we've been fairly transparent about is that our strategists, when we first brought them on and trained them up, etc., we made some choices around how we brought them on, knowing that sometimes the work would be a little bit stronger, the work would be a little bit less, because we were hiring for our ultimate capacity as opposed to our right now capacity, if that makes sense. So that's what Celene's saying. Like, make sure that you understand how you're going to support your growth as time goes on. You don't want to be hiring and delivering newbie work to your company with when you're kind of operating at scale. And there's ways you can do around that, like working with contractors who are quite experienced or other entrepreneurs, making partnerships, etc. But also consider, if you do have a slow month or 3, what does that look like if you don't have emergency savings? Is your team capable of scaling down in the same way as they are of scaling up? And I think that this becomes a bigger and bigger issue as you have a bigger team with bigger overhead. And the reason I emphasize it is because I know several very, very good, strong, amazing businesses who do incredible work, who get really positive feedback, who were forced to basically disband and reinvent because they had not thought about this ahead of time.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Things
often losing a whale client. So I'll just specify, maybe it's not a dead 3 months, but maybe it's losing a whale client or something. I think in both those situations, that was actually what happened. They lost a big client that was like 60% of their revenue and had to let go of a lot of people. And that can be extremely hard and demoralizing. Sorry to interrupt you, Celene.
Oh, no, that's true. That's a good point. And it happens to everyone. Not like necessarily everyone, but a lot of people have big clients that account, even if it's a small amount of the revenue, if they're a big enough team, a client that's 15% of their revenue could be someone's entire salary for a year.
Yeah, totally. But we don't want to scare you. To pull it back in, like if you know your head is spinning and all of this, I just want to reiterate, start at the top and work your way down and keep it simple. So the rolling 12, right? Break a bigger number into monthly numbers and ask yourself how that's relevant to each month, to what you want to be making in 3 years and what you're currently making now, right? In terms of profit, look at what your current profit percentages are and decide, do you want to scale up a little bit? Do you want to scale down a little bit? Measurables. What is one thing that you can identify that you can correlate with the amount of income that you make monthly or annually, or otherwise fulfilling your business goals, right? If you are pursuing staff, it's quite simply how many staff and what are the roles, not the people. We have no names, no personal names on this. It's just like owner, integrator, that kind of a stuff. Just make sure you write that down at a high level. And then last but not least, the goals for the year, which we haven't touched on yet. These are things that should be the acronym SMART, if you're familiar with SMART goals. Basically, they should be things where at the end of that year, you can check it off and say, yes, that is done, or no, that wasn't done, which means something like, quote unquote, improve marketing, totally guilty of writing something like that on there, is not the most effective goal that you could set. For example, saying something like, in 1 year, I want to have sold, 10 recurring revenue packages or something, is a much more realistic and specific goal, because at the end of it, you can be like, did I accomplish that? Yes or no. And ideally, and this is really, really important as well, make your goals directly linked to those measurables and to those numbers. What I mean by that is that doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs to revolve around, say, like sales or marketing, right? But one thing we've had in the past is we've kind of unintentionally sabotaged ourselves by setting goals that were things that we were really excited about, but actually took us in a different direction from our overall financial goals, which, because they were relatively ambitious, we needed to have more energy and attention on. Right? Like, let's say once we're at our 3-year goal or a 1-year goal, then, okay, maybe emphasizing goals that are for us, emphasizing goals that are a little bit less directly related to sales or marketing, totally makes sense, right? Does this make sense, Celene? Please help.
Nope, makes total sense.
Okay, awesome. Did you have anything to add about effective? I feel like effective goal setting has been one of the biggest kind of like challenges and benefits of this process. Do you have any?
I would say, sometimes if there's something in particular in your business that you're struggling with at a high level, whether it be something that you've identified or it's kind of niggling in the back of your brain, those are also things that you can set goals around if you take specific action to achieve them. For example, like a lot of agencies, their revenue's kind of up and down, right? They get a whole bunch of projects at once. They stop selling because they're busy doing their projects. Revenue goes down. They get slow. They spend time doing sales. You know that cycle. So maybe your goal is consistency. Maybe you want to hit a certain revenue for 3 months in a row. It doesn't necessarily have to be, obviously it should support your main strategy, but there's a variety of different things, or it could be like something, maybe you want to have an in-person celebration this year. Maybe that's one of your big goals. If your other kind of main things are being hit. The last thing I would say is, keep it short, keep it like maybe 3 goals. You don't want to have a whole bunch of different things that you're trying to accomplish all at once, because it's hard to focus on them and achieve them.
Yeah, I would even say if you're just one person at the leadership level, consider just 1 or 2 goals. Something that we've had a little bit of back and forth on this or about this has been, now that we are a more diverse team with more decentralized leadership, how much of this do we kind of take on ourselves as leaders versus do we ever assign goals for the team? Do we have them assign their own goals, etc.? And if you are an EOS fan, they do have some answers there around like making sure that everybody has a single number, a single measurable, different kind of things like that. But for us, ultimately, we've come back to, and note, again, if you did tune in last week, we have just begun rolling out a quarterly process that includes our chief of marketing and chief of sales in separate kind of reflective and goal setting sessions. So that's something new. We'll report back about how that goes. But for us at the leadership level, whether or not you're engaging your team on those kinds of activities, we have well and truly found that making sure that the goals are things that we can 100%, maybe not 100%, because you can't 100% control anything at the leadership level, but things that ultimately we can respectively be responsible for at the leadership level is really important. Now, that responsibility can be potentially communicating and holding accountable to some degree, but basically, if you're creating a goal for someone else and shoving it down their throat, it's not super effective, even if you think that it's the best thing ever. Surprise! I'm sure none of you are surprised to hear that, but it's still tempting to do, so don't do it.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about kind of the 1-year strategy. The next section is, what's your 1 quarter strategy? What do you want to accomplish in the next quarter? So, again, we have the future date, we have the revenue and the profit. It's exactly the same as the 1 year, but now this is looking very short term. So for the next 3 months, what do you want your revenue to be? What is that? We put it in on a monthly basis, right? Is it staying the same each month? Is it growing? What does that look like? And what is your percentage? We have it both in, or your profit, sorry, both in percentage and in dollar figures.
Yeah. And again, if you're following some sort of process where you are putting aside or observing your profit, or at least observing your profit on a regular basis, i.e. monthly or bi-monthly or each pay period or whatever, then that percentage actually, I would say, has almost more meaning than the number itself, because depending on your revenue, that ultimate number may or may not be accurate, but the percentage should consistently be accurate. Yeah. And likewise, the revenue, we do put it on a monthly basis, but we ask ourselves, at the end of this quarter, what is our total revenue number going to be for those 3 months? And we've had times where we didn't necessarily meet it monthly, or it happened in a more irregular way than we expected, but we actually found ourselves not as far off from the revenue targets as we expected, or even meeting or exceeding them. Of course, we would love to exceed our targets and goals every single quarter, but I would challenge you to say that if you are meeting and exceeding your goals every single quarter, then you're not setting them ambitious enough. Or actually, no. Let me let me reframe that, because I don't want to say, for instance, that everybody needs to grow and everybody needs to be, at a certain level. But what I'll say is that life and success often begin outside of your comfort zone. So if you're just starting to do this, I would challenge you to be perhaps a little bit less conservative, in the sense that it's kind of the same principle that if you're closing every single project, or like 90% plus projects, maybe your prices are a little bit too low. Again, temper this with your own personal kind of business goals and strategy and et cetera. We don't want to tell any business that their goals are quote unquote wrong. But I will say this, that I'm a strong believer in setting yourself. What do they say? Like shoot for the moon, because even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. I don't always agree with that, but I do think that you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And I dare you to go a little bit bigger, a little bit bolder with your targets, even if it means that you might not meet them.
Yeah, and I want to say also, conversely, if you do dream big, or even if you dream or set goals that you think are pretty realistic, and you don't hit the goals maybe in revenue, this is going to be like a little pat in the back, but like, not only don't feel bad on yourself, but look for what you did accomplish. Like this is probably going more into kind of the process, but figure out or try and frame that in a way of like, what did you accomplish? Because, this has happened to us before, where we set a revenue goal and for whatever reason, certain things happened and we didn't hit it. But we realized our kind of overarching goals that didn't have anything to do with revenue, we knocked those out of the park that quarter.
Yeah, totally. And then we use that knowledge of what we did knock out of the park, not only to like give us the joy and stoke to keep moving, right? Because if you're constantly in a state of kind of like, oh, I didn't meet that. Oh, now I'm mad at myself. Maybe I'm depressed. Why even bother, etc. If you can find those things to focus on that you did do very, very well, you can use that also as not only like energy and fuel to keep going, but as context to help you identify either better goals or better process to get there, or a context maybe that sometimes it is out of your control, and how can you plan for that in the future or identify when that context might be happening again. We all experience kind of ups and downs throughout the year. In this industry, I think I see the most often an up around, I would say like a down in the summertime, an up in the back to school season, probably for the obvious reasons, which is that a lot of people are parents, usually an up just before Christmas and a bit of a lull in January. Those are things that they haven't been 100% the same every year, but depending on how we've approached them or been aware of them, those situations have often been very successful situations for us simply because we're able to plan around what has happened in the past and the patterns we notice and what's going on. And I think that knowledge is power in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Moving to the next section, we have, measurables again. So if you get a chance to look at the template, you'll notice both kind of the 1 year and you know what, I'm going to change the name on the headers for the template, both one we use and the one that we're sharing with you guys, because it just makes more sense. Both on the 1 year and the quarterly, the beginning's the same. So we have future date, rolling 12 profit or, revenue, and then measurables. So they're the same kind of sections, but again, they have kind of that different context, right? The 1 year is that long-term measurable. What things in a year do you need to accomplish? And in the next quarter section, it's measurables again, but it's what do you need to accomplish in the next 3 months to help make sure that you accomplish your 1 year goals.
Which in turn make sure they help you accomplish your 3-year goals. So all of this is changing slightly every quarter, but the quarterly is hit the ground running. So if, in the 3-year where you were kind of doing a little bit more visioning, and even in the 1 year, you're kind of bringing your vision to ground, this is something you have to start executing on sometimes literally like yesterday, because you don't always get the opportunity to do quarterly planning on the first day of the quarter. Sometimes it's good, definitely to do it earlier, but sometimes that's not possible, right? So this is stuff you need to be able to take action on right away. So I would suggest that unless something is radically changing in your 3 months, that you are, about to step into, that this is not the place for the super, super crazy, insanely ambitious goals. I said definitely maybe push yourself outside of your comfort zone a little bit, but look at where you're currently at. And make sure that this is your bridge to get there in the 1 year, right? So you need to understand kind of what you're going to do to support those goals, whatever they are. Again, the measurables makes it a lot more simple, because it's like, if you have to sell X number of projects, and I'm currently selling X number of projects, what can I do to sell more of those projects? Or alternatively, if my average price is this, what can I do to sell more of higher level projects to bring, that average project price up? Or alternatively, if you have a total revenue goal or a monthly revenue goal, what sorts of recurring revenue or ongoing things can you potentially leverage or lean into to get there? So here's where the power lies, because this is where you're like, okay, what are we doing right now? What are we digging into right now? And what can we commit to being focused on for the near future? So that's really exciting, because that brings us to the next section, which is the rocks for the quarter. Now, this is a term that is very, very popular in EOS, and you hear people talking about the rocks all the time, including us. Basically, this is your 3-month goal instead of your 1 year goal. Right? Did you have any insight to share on kind of where we have come from and where we're at now on setting effective rocks?
Yeah, actually, well, this is also completely random, but I was looking through another kind of quarterly planning template, the Gazelle one this morning. They also use the term rocks. So it's not just an EOS thing. But yeah, it's basically that one kind of goal project type of thing that's not necessarily, that isn't part of your everyday regular work that you want to accomplish in the quarter. So it can be kind of a project that you're hoping to get done, whether, it be like redesigning your website or something. It can be a new habit you want to build. Like, do you want to read a business book a week or something? Like, if you don't have kids like I do, that might be more realistic. Or do you want to start saying no to things, which is really powerful? Is it a habit? Is it, like I said, a project? Is it a sales number? Like, is there just one single thing you want to focus on achieving? But, again, it should be similar to the SMART goal where it's specific and when you've achieved it, but it's like that one thing that you focus on that's outside your normal realm of work.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with the Eisenhower matrix at all, this should sit firmly in the important but not urgent category. So the urgent stuff will always get your attention to some degree because it's urgent, right? Well, if it's urgent and important. If it's urgent but not important, then no, you should not be spending your time on it. But the important but not urgent is where magic often happens for our businesses. This is where the high-level strategy, this is where you hit the ground running. This is where you really create the business that you desire instead of just fulfilling services, right? As a leader, your important but not urgent work. Ideally, as a service provider, which, sometimes that is the same person, but a different hat. What is important but not urgent in that role kind of changes. But as a leader, the rocks are a really great way to define and focus your important but not urgent time. Now, one of the biggest things I remember doing in here is like setting way too many of these, just like with the goals. We have become fairly firm about setting just one goal for each of us and maybe stating one habit that we would like to nurture in ourselves. And again, we once upon a time, we considered kind of like setting these for other people on the team or an admin assistant when it was just us and an admin person and et cetera. But we have come to just keep it to ourselves. We actually, quite honestly, sometimes leave this until the very end after we've talked about kind of like issues or other things and come back to it. And last quarter, we even tried, I think we said it last, and then we came back a week later to reflect on whether it was effective and whether we wanted to stick to it. Because one of the things I've been told again and again here is that you should, unless you're going to run your business off a cliff, it's important to stick to that rock for the whole quarter because it forces you to set better goals every quarter if you know that you're stuck with that thing and that's the thing that you're doing. I'm not 100% sure if I agree with that, I'll be honest. But I do think that the practice of looking at this as something that you can change at any time is a dangerous one. Yeah. Anything to add to that, Celene?
No, I think that covered the rocks pretty well. I would love to hear from people listening to this episode what sort of rocks you guys set for yourself, whether you call it that and recognize it as that. Or whether you call it something else. Because I'm always really curious to see what other people kind of set as their big projects or big plans that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love hearing about how other people approach this, especially since this has probably been the most challenging part for us. Probably because it is a little bit challenging sometimes to find a rock that supports all of your measurables and growth without being distracted by a million other things that are very shiny or interesting. One thing that's really, really, really helped us, I know we talked about it last episode, is setting a theme for the quarter. So sometimes we set this first, sometimes we set this last. This is a spot we've put in under our rocks section. Maybe it should go at the top next quarter, this quarter, I'm not sure. But reducing our theme, reducing kind of our priorities and goals for the next 3 months to a word or a series of words, I perceive has helped us, number one, bring the team on board with it and get their kind of feedback and backup without we've tried taking them through this whole document since we are a very kind of open book and transparent company. And honestly, it made their eyes cross. We were like, oh, look at all this work we've done. And they're like, okay, that's a lot of information. We don't know how it's relevant to us. But we say, hey, we picked this theme and it is storytelling at scale. And here's what it means to us. Or it is visibility and traction. And here's what it means to us, is something that people can really chomp on. And also 1 or 2 or edging towards that 3-month mark later, when you're distant from the excitement and like energy that you probably felt during the quarterly planning process when you're putting this all together, and everything is like shiny and awesome and new. That theme, I perceive, really helps keep us on track and really helps keep us centered a little bit longer to pull us through to the end of that 3-month mark when we're ready to do another bit of quarterly work.
And actually, I think we talked about this in another episode, but this is actually something that we use even for things like decision making. Like, we get that, like you said, that shiny object kind of plan or idea, and we're like, oh, this could really support us in our theme for this quarter. Or we might be like, oh, actually, you know what? We've kind of set our theme for next quarter to be this. This would go really well as a next quarter thing. It doesn't really fit with what we're working on right now,
Yeah.
which is one of the things I love about it.
Agreed. Now, briefly, because we do want to dig in to kind of planning and putting this together and some do's and don'ts and stuff we've learned, I just want to touch on the issues list a little bit. Celene, did you want to give just kind of super high level the quarterly issues list and how that differs from other issues lists?
Yeah, so we save the quarterly issues list for things that are a little bit too big and hairy and not urgent. They're either big and hairy or not urgent. That it's not, we don't really end up talking about them during our normal weekly meetings, but they're still really important and they require more time and more in-depth kind of thought and discussion or potentially more in-depth kind of planning to roll them out. We pop them on our quarterly issues list. So we're like, oh, I have this really cool idea, or, oh, this thing's not quite right, but it's not a big deal. Pop it on the quarterly issues list. And then when we have this kind of whole day that we're spending on planning, we have the leeway to tackle these bigger things.
Yeah. I also, one of the things I love about quarterly planning is we kind of give ourselves permission to go on tangents and kind of explore thoughts and ideas and possibilities in a way that we don't always do during our kind of like day-to-day and week-to-week meetings, because we only have that half an hour, we only have that hour or however amount of time, and we need to keep on track. I really, really appreciate having the leeway here. So one thing I will say is if you're finding your quarterly issues list is a little bit bare, you're not sure what to put on it, or even if you have way too much stuff, you can always simplify, right? What's already been tackled, what, maybe isn't as relevant for this year. But I highly, highly recommend looking through your other issues list. Like if you have a weekly issues list, either at the leadership level or any other level of the team, I highly recommend looking through it and asking yourself, is there anything here that's been on this list more than 3 weeks and we haven't tackled? Some of that stuff might be good to put on the quarterly issues list, even if it's not the biggest, most weighty thing in the world, because it might just, if it's already been deprioritized for a month, it's probably going to continue to be deprioritized for months. And depending, how this goes for you, for us, because this is something that we've done for so long and we're consistently kind of thinking about. And Celene is a numbers whiz, and so she does do some projections and some kind of calculations ahead of time. We often find that we have lots of leeway on our quarterly planning days. So it can be really valuable for us to look at this stuff. But even if you're just not sure what to tackle, that can give you an idea, what are some of the things that maybe aren't as important on a week-to-week or urgent on a week-to-week basis to tackle, including ideas, right? It's called issues, but we, depending on the meeting, often call it a topics list as well, because sometimes there's a topic that's not necessarily an issue. Sometimes it's even a solution that just needs to be kind of discussed and fleshed out, not fleshed out. And it can be really great to have some time that is specifically taken out of your day to tackle that.
Yeah, totally agree. I think even probably launching a podcast was something that ended up on the quarterly issues list, because it was something that was always on our weekly issues list. We're like, oh, we need a podcast. And not just because we think we need one, but we had the strategic reason for wanting one. And also because I love spending extra time talking to you. But it's sad there because there are always bigger things, fires to put out, and also at the back of our head, we're like, oh, this is a bigger conversation than 30 minutes or an hour during a meeting. Like, this is going to require a lot more planning and a rollout. So it ended up on our quarterly issues list where we had the leeway to start dreaming. What does a podcast look like? What would our theme be? Who is our audience? All these kind of things.
Yeah. And if we're going to get really practical about how to apply this, one of the things that we found very, very useful in our more recent sessions is to take our issues list and very quickly triage the whole thing. Normally the way you would tackle an issues list via the IDS model, which we have our I3DS adaptation or something, because we have a lot of data in there instead of just identified identify, discuss, solve is the IDS model. We have like identify, data, discuss, data, solve, or something like that.
We're not nerds at all.
No, not at all. But typically the way they tell you to tackle an issues list is pick the 3 most important things, prioritize them in order of which is the most important, solve them in order, and then move on to the next 3. So you can feel free to do that. That is still how we process our weekly issues in our various, arms of the business. But what we found for quarterly issues is we actually just, because it's finite list, we triage the whole thing. So we go through each one and we basically cross it. I forget exactly what like visual tools we use, but we basically we put like an H, M, or L next to it, basically. So it's like high, medium, or low priority. And the things that are high priority, we underline. So these are things that are relevant where if we don't talk about them for another 3 months, that could potentially be an issue, or it's something that has the potential to really help us get to our goals in the next 3 months. And then we look at those and we basically decide which one we want to talk about first. It's not always which is the most urgent one. Sometimes we, decide we're going to start with one that's a little bit easier, lead into one that's a little bit more challenging, or if there's something scary that, we've been putting off talking about, depending on our mood, sometimes we'll eat that frog and get it out of the way first, or sometimes we will, work up to it and approach it in a different way. But I find that triage method of just knowing how many high priority ones that we have to talk about, what are the medium priority ones, which it would be great to talk about, and the low priority ones are the ones that we've committed to not probably talking about at all. And of course, we cross out anything that's irrelevant. Now, some stuff, actually did get solved or just doesn't work anymore. I found that was really, really critical.
Mm-hmm. My personal favorite order is starting with like the most fun, exciting one and putting us in a great mood, and then following it with the one that we're like dreading tackling.
Yes. My favorite approach is doing it all while we're like picking berries or something or going for a walk.
Yeah. In our Q3 planning when all the berries are in season.
Oh, so good. We've done it in I think 2 different quarters. But anyway, so that's actually a perfect segue into the actual practical getting this shit done. So we've talked a lot about what you're doing when you're sitting down together. We do want to take a few minutes to tackle what it looks like in terms of like putting this on the calendar. What's a good way to approach it? How much time do you realistically need if you're super busy? Those kinds of topics. So again, we are a little bit unscripted here, but maybe not a little bit, totally. Totally. Like there are no notes. It's weird. But why don't we start by talking about scheduling? When do we usually schedule these in, and kind of what sort of things do we take in consideration in terms of scheduling?
Yeah, so this quarter, as we've mentioned, is a little bit different because we're doing separate quarterly planning sessions for the sales and marketing branches independently. I'm not going to dig in too much into that because it's brand new and we haven't tested it yet. So I don't have as much insight to share
next quarter.
Exactly. So, but I'll kind of share at a very high level how we're doing it. And then we'll talk more about like kind of the planning itself. So we have our pre-planning phase, which is, setting the date for the quarterly planning. Ideally, like it's like the last week of the quarter or the next week of the new quarter, like right on the cusp. You don't want to do it too early or you won't have kind of your quarterly numbers and data to reflect on. And you don't want to do it too late because then you're already missing out on part of your next quarter.
We have found that if we'll just use December, let's just use a random quarter because I think December and Christmas makes things wonky for a lot of people. But like we found that, for example, doing it on day 7 of the new quarter is a little bit late in the sense that we felt a little bit more urgency because we're like, oh crap, we're already well into this and it's going to take us another week for kind of our rocks to really gel and make sure they're the right ones. And we need to communicate this to other people. And for us, we have a team, so we need to share everything with the team and prep stuff, and it just felt a little bit hectic. But I would say, we've done it like the 3rd or the 4th a number of times, and that's worked quite well. But ideally, you want to be doing it more like the 27th or the 28th of the month before. Sometimes you can get it exactly on that last day of the month or whatever, but not always, not usually, not often in our case. Yeah, but definitely sooner is better, but not too soon. just to make it a little bit more difficult. One thing also is that, like, as you guys are probably aware, Celene and I live in different cities, so we are within physical traveling distance of each other, but it is probably a 4-hour journey, and that journey involves a ferry that only comes and goes at very specific hours. So this has caused us to have a lot of kind of questioning and experiences and trial and error around whether it's better to do this virtually, whether it's better to travel if possible and do this in person, and, you know, how important it is or isn't to, make sure that you're in a kind of slightly atypical place. That's one big recommendation we've heard a lot, is don't do this in your normal office. No matter what you do decide, your normal office and your normal work zone, it's good to kind of shake them up by going somewhere else, even if it's just a coffee shop, and doing something a little bit different there.
Yeah. And I would say, having done it both virtually online and in person, I prefer in person so much for a few reasons. One, like you said, you get to be in a different space. So if I do it virtually with you, say, I'm staring at a screen all day. I mean, I might kind of look away from the screen for part of it, but it's really, especially the first part, is great to do it as an offline exercise. And I think it's amazing also because I love you on like a human level and I like to be close to you and see you. I would say, if you're, because some of you listening might also just be doing this on your own. So if you're doing it on your own, like, get offline for as much of it as you can. If you're doing it with a partner or a team, at the very minimum, I would say do it in person once a year. If you live further away, like maybe it requires a flight or something. But if at all humanly possible, do it in person every quarter. It's a million times better. You get that connection. You get even just like the nuances of someone's body language is easier to read in person. When you both get excited, the like shared energy of excitement is better in person. It's like every aspect of it is better in person. And the way we usually kind of do it is we sit down with our VTO, our quarterly planning template for the first kind of part of it, and we fill it out on a piece of paper, super old school style. Okay,
I will actually back up a few moments and say that usually ahead of it's actually really interesting to talk, because as the person who like does the traveling and stuff, I have some slightly different perspectives. But one of the things that we usually do ahead of time is make sure that we've actually printed a piece of paper that has our last VTO or a blank VTO, if this is your first time, with the numbers on it. Yes. So it's important to have those numbers in terms of how you did last quarter written on a version of it ahead of time, so that you're not now needing to like kind of figure it out and pull out your computer and etc. That's one thing. Most of this, I would say, as much as possible, do it offline. As Celene said, live is really great. There's lots of good energy there. But prep yourself for doing it live so that you don't just get wrapped up and frustrated in the computer world again. So it's totally okay to, in fact, I would encourage to make sure that you or an admin person pulls all the, you or a leadership or admin person pulls all of the appropriate numbers. Make sure you have that physical copy before you are at wherever it is that you're going to be doing it. And just have that ready to go. Because that eliminates a lot of frustration and stress from the day of, when you want to be like focused and happy and stoked and etc. But like you're needing to dig around and like do math and like maybe print things, which, to be honest, not everybody has a printer handy right away anymore. Like I have a printer here, but like you don't have a printer there. So we've actually had to like ask your husband last minute to print something at work and bring it home for us or something like that.
Yeah. And I mean, also, if quarterly planning, it's a valuable, amazing time that you want to be focused on your planning. So if you're looking up these numbers and printing and doing all that, it eats up time, right? And then by the time you sit down to start, you've lost a couple hours of your day.
Yeah, and more importantly, it eats up energy. I'm someone who lives with my energy like 110% most of the time. So that energy is like really, really critically valuable. And even if it only takes you 20 minutes or something, or even if it's tempting to just pull out the laptop to do something, which we've done, especially in our earlier sessions, it saps your energy. And that energy is well spent doing this work, even though it's more creative, loosey-goosey work than maybe you do day to day in your urgent day to day.
Yeah, so true. And also talk about things to prep before the actual big day, like we're getting married before the big day. Is if you have the leeway for it, having almost like a mini pre-planning session where you go over things at a really high level, like maybe what sorts of themes are you thinking about, or what sorts of issues are you really excited to tackle, or if you're getting closer to the end of the quarter, starting to kind of look at the numbers so they're not a surprise and you can kind of get some of it out of the way. It also frees you up on the day of to really dive in and get focused.
Yeah, agreed. But I do want to talk a little bit to logistics because I think it's all well and good to say, oh, always do it in person if you can. The energy that you get is really incredible. But I am going to totally real talk in the sense that I have found a number of times in the past that the pressure of needing to travel and the energy drain of traveling has made the entire experience from beginning to end so much more exhausting than it would otherwise be, to the point where, we've canceled them last minute or something because either, the thought we didn't make a reservation for the ferry. Of course, this is a ferry, but, you might have like flights or just traffic or highways to navigate. Which is that, if it's been a super, super crazy time and, you've been burning the candle at both ends, expending an additional, huge amount of energy to travel just for the benefit of having that live experience. There was a long time where I felt really guilty about needing that live experience and like needing to push myself beyond my limits to do it. And quite frankly, I think it negatively impacted, if not the result of the experience, then definitely my productivity and mood for a time afterwards. Especially if you're doing this, I think there's a question to kind of address a little bit here, which is like to do during the normal work week or not. And there's pros and cons, right? Because if you're doing something that requires travel during the normal work week, then that's an additional impact on your work week. But if you're spending, a day or a weekend doing it, then that basically means that you have a 2-week work week. Because even if you're spending some personal time, the amount of time that you spent like traveling and then like doing the extra day or et cetera, and then you have to do some work to roll it out to the team and then you're back. Sometimes quite often I have left at, like 5 or 6 p.m. on a Sunday to arrive home, sometimes like at midnight or past midnight to start work at 7 a.m. the next day. So I will say this, that if you can, live is really, really good. But if it's going to drain your energy, there is absolutely no freaking shame in doing it over like Zoom or something like that. Now, I will say it's not as great in my perspective. My eyes get tired from staring at a computer screen for hours and sitting in one place. And even though I might take my laptop out somewhere that's different, like a coffee shop or to outside or something like that outside my office, you do still have that feeling of just being in a super long kind of like team meeting or something like that. And you don't have the opportunity necessarily, as have been some of my absolute favorite quarterly planning times, to like go on an adventure or change spots. Like I would say some of the most successful live sessions that Celene and I have had, we've started out one place in the morning. Maybe we've gone out for lunch or gone out to somewhere else for like an hour or two in the afternoon. And then we've rewarded ourselves by like quite often, I would say my favorite is when we tackle our issues list, being out and about in some way, whether that's like we're both very outdoorsy people. So I think that's very natural for us, despite the fact that we both work on computers, maybe because of that, where we like take a beautiful walk, like by and go check out a duck pond, or, we like check out a park and like maybe do a little bit of like swinging or like, take a piece of paper on a picnic bench as, working out. I find issues in particular because they are things that are more dynamic. Sometimes they don't have an easy solution. Sometimes it's kind of uncomfortable. And also, since just straight up, they're the last thing that you usually do. So it feels really nice to reward myself in that way. So definitely don't get me wrong. Like, if you can, I do believe that the energy of being live in person, especially if it's like you're just aiming for once a year or something, is really, really great. But don't be hard on yourself and beat yourself up about it if you don't think that's the best fit for you. And don't be afraid to change it up. That's something that we've definitely, like every quarter has been kind of slightly different about how we approach it. And we haven't found magical answers to some things. Like, for example, do we do it during the week or do we do it on weekends? That's a question where before we always did it on weekends just because we didn't have time during the week. But now, we're realizing, oh, we don't actually have to do that. But then how does it disrupt our weeks, right? Like, we work shorter weeks. Anyway, there's lots of different questions. Did you have any perspectives, Celene?
No, I mean, well, for me, my schedule is a lot more flexible than yours, and I have the benefit of you traveling to me. So a lot of these logistics and considerations are more important on your end. But yeah, I would just reiterate what you said, that more than anything, it's important to protect your energy and your mental health at all costs, especially as an entrepreneur. You have so much on your plate, and you kind of are unless you've already scaled quite a bit, you are your business, and so your energy is like super, 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 super valuable. And as much as quarterly planning is also valuable, it's not worth it to negatively affect your energy or mental health.
Totally, because you also do not want to have a negative association with quarterly planning where maybe now this hasn't happened to us, but I think it's a very real danger where maybe if it feels like this frustrating experience, or you have to jump through all these hoops to do it, or you just know that you're going to be super shitty and exhausted at the end, those are red flags. Those are red flags to maybe shift something, because even though this may seem like a lot, it might seem overwhelming, it might seem scary. This is honestly one of the most freaking awesome parts of the business. It's an opportunity to really celebrate, get clear, express ideas, dig into deep, meaty things you haven't really had the opportunity to, spend some time live with someone that you spend a lot of time on video with, if that's the way your team works, and I definitely encourage you to nurture things that help you look forward to it. Again, that's not to say that, especially if this is new to you, it won't be a little bit scary sometimes, or especially at first. But it's a really, really cool experience, especially once you've done it a few times and you're starting to see the patterns, and starting to see that not everything is changing every time. And you're like, wow, we have had some of the same goals for over a year and we're getting closer to them, because you are doing this every 3 months, your goals are changing every 3 months, but you're still on the path towards that same 3-year goal or something like that, or towards that 10-year goal. It's magical.
Speaking of deep and meaty, I realized we get so excited going into things at such detail that we're running kind of long again, and we haven't really gotten to the day of process. I think this is one of the pitfalls of not having any sort of notes or outline, is we can't be like, oh, we're not even halfway through what we wanted to cover and we're already getting close to time. Let's speed things along because we're just having so much fun talking.
That is true. At the same time, I think the day of, to some degree, we've started touching on it. Also, quite frankly, it may seem complicated or something, but to some degree, you're literally just taking this 2-page thing and going through it in order. If in doubt, before we get into kind of more complicated steps and stuff like that, basically if you start at the beginning and work through to the end, you're doing pretty good.
That's pretty much, actually, you know what? We could just sum it up as, you work through the VTO. So, I mean, what else do we do on the day of? So we work through the VTO. Usually we kind of do the vision in the morning. And now that our vision is so solidified, we usually do the vision and the traction kind of together in the morning. Then we take lunch. Sometimes we start, doing some of the goal setting or thinking about things, or we'll review the accountability chart in the morning. And then we go out for lunch, which is always my favorite part, is getting to hang out and relax and giving yourself permission to completely drop it out of your head for an hour. I think is really nice, because quarterly planning can be pretty dense and intensive, and it's important to let your brain rest and recuperate. And then usually what we do is kind of in the afternoon is where we dive into the issues and topics and dreaming and kind of those bigger conversations where we'll get outside, we'll go for a walk, we'll relax. And that's where I find the magic really happens.
Yeah, agreed. Some of the number stuff, like I said, especially at first, it felt kind of arbitrary, or it felt kind of scary, or sometimes it just feels really exciting. I think as you start to get into it, But yeah, I definitely agree. We tend to follow a pretty typical kind of like 9 to 5 ish process. I mean, we're early birds, so we've definitely gotten started at like 8 or 8:30 before. But they say that you're supposed to really carve out a full day for this every 3 months. And then they say, I think like 2 or 3 days every year for an annual, like a deeper annual planning session. And I know I have spoken to partners who really find that they need to hold that time really sacred. But I will say, after 4 years of doing this, we have found ourselves finishing early more than once. Especially like, the vision section alone, the first time probably took us 3 or 4 hours. Now, even with us really digging into it and asking empowering questions and etc., it's usually less than an hour because, again, like our values and focus and 10-year target and all that kind of stuff, it's refined a little bit over the years, but it's not radically changing. And I don't think it necessarily, even your 3-year picture, I don't think that's something that should be radically changing, or rather to kind of get out of the shoulds. If that's something that's radically changing for you, literally every quarter after you've been doing this for a full year, then perhaps you have some like deeper questions to answer for yourself around your personal goals and what you want your business to look like, or at the very least, ask yourself why. So with that in mind, like definitely set yourself aside a full day of uninterrupted time to do this. So that means you're not checking Slack, you're not checking your email. Again, like for us, the only time it was possible to do this at first was on like a Sunday or something like that. But it's really, really worthwhile to set aside that time. Even if you do find yourself finishing early, it's worth it to have that time set aside than to find yourself, chafing at the bit because you only gave yourself a morning to do this and you have client calls in the afternoon or something like that. That is a bad idea. just take it from me. I've tried going that route and it's just not effective. One thing also is we have kind of shifted now to, with the travel issue, that's something that we're still kind of navigating. I think the next thing that we're going to try is making it during the week, but like, and I know, Celene, we haven't necessarily gotten super deep into this, but this is one thing I know we were going to try, is doing it in kind of a single intense day. So for me, maybe arranging the travel and stuff. So it's like one day during the week, but it's a whole day. And separating it from a personal visit was kind of a scary thing, but a larger thing that we did as well, where we decided that, now that we have more time and leeway, we would do more kind of like just personal visits and not try to like put too many things onto this one day or this one session. So once again, I mean, if you've listened to any of our digital agency Real Talk, we say the same thing over and over again, but that's because it's important, which is keep it simple. Start by keeping it simple, and complicate later if you have to. Probably you won't need to. But just keep it as simple as you need to make this functional, effective as you can for you and to protect your mental and emotional energy, because that stuff's important.
Yes. One thing, I'm not necessarily sure I have it kind of listed on my process, but it's something to keep in mind, is that throughout this day, you will probably have a big old list of action items. If you're doing planning for yourself, it might just be a to-do list for yourself for the quarter. If you have a team, it'll be a list of things that your team is going to be assigned over the next week or two. But where was I going with this? This is the dangers of doing this without extra coffee. Is that you're going to have a big to-do list. You're going to have a big list of things to roll out. So make sure, first of all, that you have somewhere adequate to record it and that you write clear notes so you're not wondering what that meant afterward, because there's so much going on. But set a plan for how you're going to implement these action items, because sometimes there's a lot of really big things, if you're talking about big issues, that aren't necessarily realistic to do all at once. But at the same time, if you leave them for a few weeks, you're going to start losing momentum on them or forget about them. So it's hard to find that balance, but the way that we usually do it is we set kind of a plan for what's going to happen when, and then we try and spread out who we're assigning it to, so one person doesn't just have like a massive amount of things to do all at once.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say a work block soon after quarterly planning, just for kind of delegating and assigning things if you do have a team at your disposal, or for just for prioritizing and, figuring out when you're going to deploy things if it is mostly on you. That was kind of a critical piece. Like for me, again, as kind of the owner, with so many different things on my plate in the early days because I was wearing all of the hats. It was, sometimes challenging because we'd come up with all of these good ideas during quarterly planning, and I would really struggle to kind of like deploy them or take action on them. And finally, now it's a little bit simpler and more straightforward, especially since Celene is chief of ops, where, that is her particular role, is that she will kind of execute all of the kind of delegation and actions afterwards, and she sets aside time to do that. But just be careful of falling into the trap of having all these good ideas. And again, this is something we mentioned last time. Be careful of having a really great quarterly planning day or a few days or whatever, and then tucking this into a drawer or a file folder and then just not looking at it for another 3 months. And often the bridge between that is twofold. One is this action item, creating a plan for your action items, as Celene said. And two is, if you do have a team, sharing with them at a high level what you got out of this experience, what some of the reflections are, contextualizing, the goals that either were met or not met, and inspiring and empowering them with the same kind of vision for the next 3 months that you see. And I found that especially with, like the theme for the quarter, setting a theme for the quarter has allowed it to be the word on everyone's lips for 3 months instead of, something that was really well intentioned and potentially really helpful, but ultimately not practical to the business. Oh, are you still there, Celene?
I'm still there. I just didn't have like a comment.
Okay, well, we can edit that out to our awesome editors. And I think that brings us to the end of most of what we had to cover. Were there any last kind of like topics or things that come to mind, or different elements or stuff that you wanted to touch on before we let our listeners go?
Yeah, one thing that didn't really come up too much, but that I think is so important about quarterly planning is setting aside the time to reflect on your wins from the quarter and celebrate what you've accomplished. Like, no matter how your quarter went, like hopefully it went amazing and you have tons and tons and tons to celebrate and you're so stoked on your amazing quarter. Even if it wasn't your best quarter ever, I bet there are things that you rocked. And it's really important to kind of set that positive mood and to really acknowledge all the hard work that you've put in the last 3 months, and give yourself the space to celebrate it, whether that be, treating yourself in some way, even if it's like a small thing, like we always eat lots of chocolate. But
yes,
making
so much
sure
chocolate.
that quarterly planning, it's not a chore, it's also a celebration.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the power of celebrating our successes, honestly, it's well documented in research, the impact of that on building positive habits and further successes. So, definitely that's something to explore if you're curious about it. But yeah, I would agree. Celebrating is so, so, so important. Even if it's just going out for lunch, even if it's literally getting up and like doing a little dance, the two of you or the three of you or just you or whatever to your
Just
favorite
dance
song.
alone.
I am a huge fan of dancing alone. I'm just a huge fan of dancing
Me too.
in particular. I think that's a beautiful note to kind of leave our listeners with is make it fun. Don't forget to celebrate. This is your opportunity to shine as a leader, not like this is your opportunity to have a bunch of pressure on you to like make sure that everything is successful and awesome. But for a lot of us, I think this is to some degree the work that we crave, and get stuck so much doing client work, or putting out fires, so to speak. And I don't want to say that like client work and project work isn't awesome and fun. And if you're someone who really likes being involved in that, like your experience again is totally valid. But that being said, if you are someone like many of our listeners who craves that they can spend time at the leadership level, honey, this is your opportunity to shine one day a quarter. If you're not getting any time on this, one day a quarter, even if it's a weekend day, to put aside to just think and dream about your business at a high level. Celebrate, play, make this playful. That's one of the things I love about this. You won't regret it. And that does it for another amazing episode of the Say It Online podcast. Join us next week. And don't forget to like and subscribe, whether it's iTunes, whatever your favorite podcast player is. It is always, always appreciated. It really makes a difference for us. It helps us get this word out to more people. As always, this episode was brought to you by our sponsor and Say's own business, Anansi Content. If you're a digital agency owner and you're still wasting too much time chasing down content that maybe isn't even all that great, let's talk. We've spent years working on the best process for selling, planning, and delivering amazing conversion content for your client projects. Better yet, we moosh our process to yours so that your client and you have a seamless and amazing experience the entire time through. If you're interested, just go to our website. That's www.anansicontent.com. That's ANANSI content.com. And just click Let's Talk. I'd love to chat with you. Someone else on the team would also love to chat with you too. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day.